Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am a scarecrow. This is my Halloween costume. In this video, I'm going to be recommending 10 books that give off that spooky Halloween vibe, but didn't scare me too much. I am a little bit of a scaredy cat. I don't really like horror movies. I don't really like scary movies or psychological thriller movies. They really mess me up. I get really vivid nightmares. Anyway, without having movie inspiration for my scary dreams, so I just kind of steer clear from scary movies. However, I love Halloween and I love reading a spooky book here and there that it at the very least gives off the vibes of Halloween. So in this video I'm recommending 10 spooky Halloween-y fall books that didn't really scare me but might scare you. And obviously fear is subjective, so read these books with caution. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary for each of the books and talk about the vibe of each of the books, so you can decide which spooky book might fit your reading tastes. I'm going to start off with the least scary to the most scary, the one that actually scared me quite a bit. So we'll start with number 1. The first book I'm going to talk about, I have a dedicated review for, and that is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This is about 6 magicians competing for 5 secret society spots, and I have a full review for it, so if you want to see my in-depth thoughts on this book, you can check out that video. The vibe of this is very much so dark academia, but also it kind of messes with your head a little bit because the characters are trying to kind of manipulate each other and freak each other out and get in each other's heads to try and win this competition. This is 0 out of 10 on the scary scale, but I think it still evokes kind of a Halloween spooky fall vibe, and I really did quite enjoy this book. The second book I have is If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This is about a group of 7 friends who go to a prestigious theater school, university, and all they do is perform Shakespeare at this university, and one of them is killed and one of them is the murderer. And at the beginning of the book, one of the characters comes out of jail. He's been in jail for 10 years for this crime, and he is telling the true events to a detective for the first time. And I really enjoyed this. I am a huge fan of Shakespeare retellings and Shakespeare in general, so this really hit that vibe for me. And the fact that this is wrapped up in kind of a murder mystery as well as the Shakespeare elements really gave me that dark vibe. Again, I don't think this is very scary at all, like a 0 or a 1 out of 10, but there is a sense of anxiety and a sense of what's gonna happen next, who did it, who is the killer, who is the murder victim. You don't even know at the beginning of the book. So it does have a sense of anxiety to it, although I don't think it's particularly scary. The third book I have is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I absolutely love this author. I am on a hunt to read basically everything she's ever written, and Certain Dark Things is a vampire noir action-packed gangster story about the vampire Adel, who is on the run from a rival vampire clan, and she meets up with a trash collector named Domingo, and he kind of volunteers to help her escape from Mexico City. And this is about them being kind of stuck in Mexico City trying to escape. There's human gangs, there's vampire gangs, there's the Mexican police that are after them. So this is very action-packed, very violent, but it also has a sense of that vampire story. And there is a doggy. And I will say the dog is not injured or is not killed at the end of the book, just so we're clear that we must protect Kuali is his name. He's fine. And the vibe of this is obviously this is vampire lore, and vampires kind of evoke that fall spooky vibe. And again, I wouldn't say this is very scary at all, although I was concerned with the level of violence in this book. I was actually concerned about like our main characters getting killed. But again, not scary at all, but I think it does evoke a really good spooky Halloween vibe with the vampire lore. The next book I have to talk about is Night Film by Marsha Pessel, and this actually did scare me just a teeny bit. So this book opens with the unfortunate suicide of the daughter of a famous horror filmmaker, and there is a detective who is convinced that the suicide was actually a murder. So he is investigating the death of this young woman, and it kind of unravels into an investigation about her father and her father's horror films and the fans of these films who are kind of cultish, and it spirals from there. And I still think about this book. I don't think this is scary as in terms of like jump scares or, you know, monsters or anything like that, but the anxiety I felt reading this book was intense. I couldn't put it down. It's really thick and dense, and I just couldn't stop reading this because I had to know what happened next. I had to hear more of the mystery. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, I think I gave this like a 2 or a 3 out of 10 in terms of like scary. It just really exudes this level of anxiety that I couldn't put it down. Then we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a nonfiction book, and that kind of doesn't make sense in the context of this video, but Carmen Maria Machado writes her memoir against the backdrop of a haunted house. So she uses the haunted house trope as a means of explaining and talking about her story and her story with an abusive queer relationship. So this is not necessarily scary, but it uses that haunted house mien to discuss and dissect this relationship. And honestly, the relationship is a little scary because, you know, there's nothing scarier than the fear that your partner is going to commit violence against you. So this was kind of hard to read for that reason. So it's a little bit of a different vibe than these other spooky books. But I really enjoyed this, and I think this is a must read. I just think the writing is beautiful and haunting, but not necessarily scary in the same way that these other books are scary. Number 6 is All the Bad Apples by Moira Fowley Doyle. This is about a family who has every girl in the family line is cursed, and this is a little paranormal, a little creepy, but the thing that scared me about this book is the level of violence and hatred against queer folk, against queer women specifically, that the Catholic Church put these women through. This talks a lot about those Catholic schools where if a woman was unwed and had a baby out of wedlock, they would put her in this like workhouse school where she would be basically used as a slave, and she would deliver the baby and then she would never see the baby again, and the baby was put up for adoption, and these women were basically tortured. And this was a real thing that happened, I mean, all across the Catholic world, but specifically this is set in Ireland. And so I learned a lot about that historical and not so historical atrocity that happened to these young women, and this is kind of a fictionalized sort of paranormal exploration of that topic. And so for that reason, I think it's a little spooky. It has really hard-hitting themes with these women and these young girls, and also this idea of this family being cursed. So it's a little spooky, a little scary, and I actually really adored this book. It made me cry, it made me think really deeply, and I think more people should read this if you can handle the content. Next is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I will not shut up about this book. This is a Dracula's Brides retelling, and our main character, Constanta, is the point of view that we read from as Dracula is incorporating more people into their marriage. So this is a polyamory story, but this is also a story of abuse and toxic relationship, as the Dracula character is abusive and narcissistic towards his partners. This is, again, one of the most beautifully written books I have read. It's nice and short, and it definitely gives off that spooky vibe with the vampire lore, but also this idea of exploring toxic relationships. That's also pretty spooky. This does have some vampire type gore and violence, as well as some sexual violence, so keep that in mind. I don't think this scared me, but this definitely gave off that spooky fall vibe with the vampires. I'm cheating for this next one because I'm just gonna recommend these two books by Ruth Ware, One by One and The Turn of the Key. These books got me into reading horror, spooky thrillers. So to me, I really enjoyed both of these books by Ruth Ware, and they kind of freaked me out a little bit, even though for most people that I've seen on the internet, these were not super scary. But for me, who'd never read thrillers before, these kind of tickled that itch or kind of piqued my interest and got me a little spooked. The Turn of the Key is a Turn of the Screw retelling following this woman who becomes a nanny for these kids, and possible paranormal shit happens. One by One is kind of a Agatha Christie style. Everyone is stuck on a mountain chalet during a blizzard, and people die off one by one, and we're trying to figure out who the killer is. I thought both of these were great. I had such a great time reading these, and I was a little freaked out. We're getting up there into the books that actually legitimately scared me, and I had to read both of these in one sitting because I had to know what was going on. In terms of what they were scary, like what type of scary they were, definitely the anxiety kind. Like there's nothing too creepy except for The Turn of the Key that had some creepy elements into it, but it was more of the anxiety of not wanting to know what happened next rather than the like gore or anything like that. So I really liked both of these. Next, we have When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Now, a lot of people don't like this book, and they're wrong. This is about a woman who lives in a neighborhood in New York, and that is slowly being gentrified out from everybody's noses, and no one seems to be noticing what's going on. People are disappearing, but she's the only one who's like paying attention. And honestly, that scared me, and I'm not a Black person, so I found this incredibly eerie, this idea of this like sneaky, like, and obviously gentrification is truly happening. So it was the combination of like what's happening fictionally, where these people are disappearing, these houses are getting kind of snatched out from under the original residents, but also the idea and knowing that this is happening in real life was incredibly eerie to me, and I was a little scared of this. So I would give this a try just to understand the fear of being Black in a neighborhood that is being gentrified. I really felt that. Not everyone does, but I really did, and I thought that this was a great exploration of that. So this really did kind of creep me out quite a bit. So sorry, I had to shift over a little bit because the sun is right in my face. So apologies for this little like movement of the camera and for like some of the crazy lighting. But you only have to endure it for one last book. So let us talk about the last book that I have to talk about, which is The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. Now this book actually gave me the creeps, actually gave me some bad dreams. This is about Geyer, who is spelunking on a planet, and she's going into deep caves, underwater caves, and encountering all sorts of peril along the way. She is also in contact with one person who's like guiding her mission, and the person she is in contact with is lying to her. So this has a little bit of a psychological element to it, as well as the sci-fi thriller aspect of like the claustrophobia of being in confined spaces and underwater and all of that creepiness. Now, this is queer. This actually did scare me quite a bit, but I think it is worth the read. Maybe not for your first thriller, mystery, horror read, but I definitely think it's worth a try if you've read a few psychological thrillers, sci-fi thrillers, and that sort of thing. I really do like this book, and I kind of want to reread it, even though I know what happens. I just think it was really well done. So, those were the 10 book recommendations I had for spooky season for us Scaredy-Cats, and I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!